Last year, a federal appeals court overturned a lower court decision that had condemned the National Security Agency's warrantless wiretaps of thousands, if not tens of thousands of Americans. This was a case that was brought by individuals who believed their phone calls or emails had been intercepted by the government without a warrant. But the Justice Department claimed that these people had no standing to sue because the feds refused to disclose whether they had actually violated these individuals' rights and their privacy. A federal appeals court threw the case out. Judge Alice Batchelder, who was on the short list of nominees for the Supreme Court last time, she wrote that the plaintiffs are ultimately prevented from establishing standing because of the state secrets privilege. This is a judge's version of frat party ethics. As long as the government blindfolds its victims, it can do as it pleases. And it was there were such bizarre convolutions to justify overthrowing this case, and yet it was applauded by the Washington Post editorial page, which has been on the wrong side of many of the most important issues over the last 6 and 7 years. As far as civil liberties, as far as understanding how the government can treat people, can treat American citizens and treat everybody else, the torture scandal kind of summarizes how this nation and how perhaps American values have changed. People now face the prospect of being sentenced to death because of their own tortured confession, or because of the tortured confession of other people down at Guantanamo or Afghanistan or other places. It's turning back the clock at least 200 to 300 years. The thought of using tortured confessions in judicial proceedings. It looks like it's a riff out of a Monty Python movie. And yet, not only is it happening in America at this point in Guantanamo, but it's also, so far, has not been very controversial. There's some people here speaking later this weekend who have done magnificent work on this issue. But overall, this issue has not gotten anywhere near the traction. Now, it's interesting, from the first days after the Abu Ghraib photos hit the airwaves, the torture scandal epitomized the worst of the Bush administration. There was a timid media, there was a cowardly opposition party, a refusal by most Americans to face the grisly facts. There was a web of lies and lawlessness, but this may be on the verge of unraveling. There are challenges from foreign governments, from some courageous U.S. military officers, and the Supreme Court still could come around and do something good on this. But it's frustrating to see that the media still acts as if Bush deserves deference when he denies the U.S. is involved in torturing, or he says that the U.S. wouldn't do something like this. There was in 2005, Bush repeatedly, explicitly said the U.S. will not use rendition, which means seizing a suspect in one nation and transferring him to another country where he would be tortured. Bush was explicit on this. However, it turned out that the U.S. has been doing that en masse. There have been books on this, there have been documentaries, but it turned out that Bush lied on this through his teeth, and yet he's still treated as credible on the torture issue. Now, it's interesting how the government uses the legal doctrines and what it's done to achieve absolute power over an individual. There was a case of David Hicks. This is an Australian who was seized in Afghanistan and sent to Guantanamo in early 2002. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld said that Hicks was one of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. During his 5 years confinement, Hicks was sexually assaulted, beaten with a rifle butt, kept in isolation in the dark for 244 days, prohibited from sleeping for long periods, threatened with firearms during interrogations, and psychologically tormented. His Hicks abuse became a major issue in Australia, where a Bush ally, Prime Minister John Howard, was involved in a hard fight for re-election. Hicks was the first person tried by the Guantanamo military tribunals. He faced the death penalty. However, the Bush administration wanted to help John Howard, so Hicks was allowed to plead guilty to material support of terrorism, and he was sentenced to 9 months confinement. Now, this is the kind of penalty that's generally used for a drunk driving repeat offender. And instead, you have it used for this guy who was, Rumsfeld said was one of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. As part of his plea agreement, Hicks was prohibited from speaking to the media for 1 year until after the Australian election. Hicks was also obliged to sign a statement declaring that he had never been illegally treated by any person or persons while in the custody and control of the U.S., and to swear that his guilty plea was done voluntarily despite all the beatings he received. And it summarizes that, you know, lying about torture was the price of freedom for Hicks. The only way they would let him go is if he would sign these statements. And my impression is the same happens often in other terrorist prosecutions and a lot of other federal prosecutions as well. Now, it's interesting that there are still congressmen and a lot of conservative talk show hosts who say that this concern about torture is all like a you know, liberal fantasy. A Congressman, Dana Rohrabacher of California, who was, a lot of people thought of as a fairly libertarian congressman, even a couple of days ago, he was mocking an Inspector General report on the abuses at Guantanamo, saying it was just like college fraternity hazing. Well, even bad frats usually don't kill that many people. And there have been a lot of people who died because of U.S. interrogations in the last 6 years. Now, as far as how the Bush folks have tried to contain the damage from the torture scandal, they've tried a couple different things. One is simply outright lying, saying that the U.S. government is not doing this, and second is using secrecy to buttress the lies. Last October, the New York Times got a leaked Justice Department memo from early 2005, which permitted CIA interrogators to use, quote, combined effects on detainees, which included head slapping, waterboarding, frigid temperatures, manacling for many hours, and blasting them with loud music to keep them from sleeping for days on end. The New York Times said this was an expansive endorsement of the harshest methods ever used by the CIA. And this came out at the same time the Bush folks were saying, we do not torture, we obey the law. But the Bush very quickly came out and said, after the New York Times story came out, this government does not torture people. He said that we stick to U.S. law and our international obligations. But this is law as contorted by administration lawyers. And as some of the recent memoirs have shown, the Bush administration doctrine is that as long as there is one lawyer who will say to Bush, yes, this is legal, that's good enough. Rule of law now means just finding a single bootlicking lawyer to applaud the president. The whole notion of checks and balances has been lost, and any notion of accountability. Now, another fascinating part about this New York Times story, it detailed how after 9/11, the CIA had constructed an interrogation regime by consulting Egyptian and Saudi intelligence officials and copying Soviet interrogation methods. It's interesting, for decades, the U.S. condemned the Soviet Union for using torture. But interrogation systems designed to compel victims to sign false confessions are now the model for protecting America in the new century. Now, it's hard to convey how much this symbolizes what this nation has changed. And it's great the Future of Freedom Foundation has been in the forefront of organizations that have been uncompromising on this issue. And there have been a number of libertarian organizations that have kept quiet on this, especially here in the D.C. area. And or else they've come to it very lately. I mean, it's always sad if a libertarian organization is slower than the Washington Post editorial page to condemn a government abuse. But this has happened a lot of times over the last few years. Now, a final issue in the state of American civil liberties, it goes to the question of the rule of law. And I think one of the biggest troubles we have in this country right now is that it is presumed that the U.S. president has a right to kill foreigners. It's rarely stated that bluntly, but just as long as he doesn't kill too many of them at one time, and as long as his spokesman offers certain rationales,